The Finalize method is the next stop on understanding garbage collection and iDisposable interface and why it's written the way it is and so forth. So let's just continue here, and let me warn you, if this is getting confusing listening to this clown babble on and on in these videos here about the whole garbage collection process, iDisposable, the dispose method, Finalize, and all this, it only sounds confusing because it is. But for now, trust me, just kind of take in this information, follow it as best you can, and in the video where we talk about the disposable example, you'll see it in code, and I'll explain how it's working, and hopefully all this will pop into focus for you. You may have to watch all this a time or two, but I'm trying here to give you the clearest explanation of this whole process that I've ever been able to put together and figure out. Now, the iDisposable interface provided the dispose method, right? And that was supposed to have been called by whoever used our class to build an object, and when they called that dispose method, when they were done using that object, it was going to release unmanaged resources. If that's never called, our unmanaged resources are going to be left out there and create memory leaks. But we could also use it while we're in there destroying unmanaged resources. We could also take care of some managed resources as well and go ahead and have them out of the way. But keep in mind, its real purpose was to release unmanaged resources. Now, if the dispose method never gets called, the unmanaged resources are not released. But we have one more chance to make sure that we get those unmanaged resources taken care of, and that is using the Finalize method. Now, the garbage collector will eventually free all managed objects. They're not a problem. But the garbage collector does not free the managed objects by calling our dispose method. Go back to iDisposable interface. It has one method that we have to implement, the dispose method. But that is something that the consumer of our class that's creating objects is supposed to call, and the dispose method is something that we're supposed to use to release unmanaged resources. The garbage collector is not interested in our dispose method. Now, the garbage collector, whenever it gets ready to clean out all the managed objects, is going to call the Finalize method. Now, we can override the Finalize method and add a little code of our own just to make sure that the unmanaged resources do get released. So, if somebody forgot to call the dispose method, then we can write a little code in Finalize that says, hey, just make sure those unmanaged resources are taken care of, okay? Now, let me give you a confusion alert here, like you need one, right? To override that Finalize method, you don't actually use the name Finalize. You create a brand new method with the same name as your class name, and you begin the method with a tilde, a squiggly, a tilde, a tilde, a tilde, whatever you want to call it, and it's that little character right there. It's usually the upper left corner of your keyboard up there near the 1 button, okay, the 1 key. You have to shift to get it. Now, so if the class is named Cars, then the finalizer on that class will be tilde cars. Okay, so that'll be the name of the method. Now here's what happens. The Finalize method that is built like class name, tilde class name, whatever the name of your class, is called a destructor. The compiler takes the tilde file name method to be your implementation of the Finalize method. So if you were to actually build this tilde class name method and compile this thing and then go look at the MSIL code, you would actually see a Finalize method there. Now there's one more thing to consider about this whole situation. There is a slight bug in the destructor code that Microsoft calls when they see your tilde class name method or destructor out there, and that is, it does, in this instance, call your dispose code. Now your dispose method may have already been called, so what happens, Finalize is always going to be called, and we're going to try to override it, but even if we don't override it, it's going to be called, and that may call your dispose method. Now if you've overridden it and your dispose method has already been called and cleaned up the managed objects, the GC is now trying to find managed objects. It's going to create a mess. So we need the Finalize method that we're overriding to tell our original dispose method that was part of the iDisposable interface, don't worry about managed objects, because if dispose has already been called, just deal with the unmanaged objects. All right? Now, how do we tell Finalize to let dispose know not to touch any managed resources because they've already been dealt with. Just go about the business of checking out the unmanaged resources. Well, we're going to create a third method that's really not part of the original iDisposable interface, but we're going to use that. We are going to satisfy the iDisposable interface. We're going to create that original dispose method, the standard dispose method, but we're going to make that standard dispose method make one single call out to another dispose method. All right, the new method is going to be, just like you see here, protected. It's not going to return anything, void dispose, and it's going to pass a Boolean value for disposing. We're going to call that from our dispose method, and we're going to pass the true meaning. Okay, we're going to pass the parameter, I guess I should say true, from the dispose method when we call it. And that true means I'm calling you from dispose, so it's safe to work with managed objects. The finalizer or the destructor is going to call it passing false, meaning, hey, I'm the destructor. I'm not calling you from dispose, so it's not safe to work with managed objects. Just skip it and don't worry about it. Now, there's one more thing we can do to make all this easier and even a little more confusing. That's just what you need, right? We got into this whole destructor deal because the dispose method might not have been called. But what if it was called and everything was cleared up? Well, when we call the dispose method, we can put a single line in there to tell the garbage collector that dispose has been called, and there's no reason for it to waste any effort or resources calling the finalize method. We've got kind of a circular thing going here. So in the original dispose method, we're going to add one line of code, GC suppress finalize this, and that will prevent the finalize method or the GC from trying to go back and clean up all those all those managed objects. So that's the deal. Go through these very slow, make sure they make sense to you, and now let's go look at some code. Join me in the iDisposable example video and we'll take a look at this a little closer.